It's another fine day at Camp Dynasty. I am Counselor Austin, joined by Counselor Collin, and it is a very special night, not only at Camp Dynasty, but the national championship is being played as we speak. By the time you're hearing this, a champion will be decided. Jeremiah Smith just scored a touchdown. So,
Tie game.
what do we think?
I mean, I was surprised that Notre Dame marched down in their first possession. Felt like Ohio State had some chances to stop them. Didn't get it. But if this is going to be a high-scoring slugfest, then I'm all for it.
I'm in. And a few players in the game tonight, maybe making an appearance on the show tonight. We're going to figure that out soon because we're talking about not one, not two, but three position groups. This is IDP Rankings 2.0, closing out the Rankings 2.0 series with a bang, Collin. 3 positions, just like last year. We'll do top 3 edge, D-line, top 3 linebackers, and then we'll just chit-chat about DBs because that's unfortunately what happens to DBs. But
yeah, if you're not playing IDP, I think that you should. I started playing. I thought it was a weird concept when I started. And it's like, why are we putting defensive players into this? This is kind of awkward. And then you get into it, and fantasy football just doesn't really feel complete without the defensive side of the ball. It feels like you're neglecting an entire phase of the sport when you don't have defensive players on your roster. So if you're here and you don't do IDP, I'm not sure why you're here, but maybe you're trying to get into it. But if you are in an IDP league, you know what I'm talking about. It just doesn't quite feel. You do redraft leagues, and it's like I wish I could have TJ Watt on this squad. You know,
I literally wholeheartedly agree with every part of what you just said. Like, I don't think I could play fantasy without it, like in a serious fashion again, because it's so impactful. Like, and the thing is, when you can gain a skill advantage in a world in which, you know, every media outlet is telling you about running backs and wide receivers and quarterbacks, IDP is where you can set yourself apart if you're willing to put the time in. And, you know, a lot of times it's just fun to have the stars on defense that we all know and love. So
yeah, and then if you can get in early on guys like who we're going to talk about today potentially, and you can hold on to them and they become stars on your team, it feels even better to watch those guys dominate in the NFL, a la Jared Verse. I know he was one of your guys, and seeing him, even though he's not giving you fantasy points, seeing him dominate a playoff game, even though the Rams lost, just kind of makes you feel like a proud father, like watching Jared Verse like get a strip sack, and it's like, that's my boy, you know.
It does, it really does. And I'm gonna make some irresponsible offers for Jared Verse this offseason, but alas, let's talk about 2025. I will give my usual preamble, which is that this is IDP. And that comes with a couple of caveats. Firstly, it is January. Tape is not widely available for the entire class. We do what we can. We've hacked the system a little bit, watching all 22 for, you know, X quarterback that's playing against this player, but it's not a perfect science. So we do what we can here based off of what we saw in the summer, what we saw during the season, and then any tape that we have been able to get our hands on at this point of the process. And the other thing I'll say is that, as we know, this is a very landing spot dependent position group in a way that is even more so than our offensive guys. Because the thing with IDPs is these guys, the value can change so dramatically based off of where they're taken and who they're taken by. So it's harder to look at this group from a fantasy perspective in a vacuum compared to the offensive players. So that I always give the caveat because I think it's important to recognize where we are at this point in time with IDPs. And also because this is a very deep and good IDP group, meaning defensive group. Like this NFL draft coming up in a few months is very heavy on defensive talent. So the hairs it becomes a little bit more, you're splitting hairs come draft time versus doing evals and saying, yeah, 12 edge guys are really good. Like I'm not drafting all those guys for my fantasy team. So
yeah, absolutely. It's going to come down to, like, we can do these rankings independent of everything. But when it comes down to it, where they're drafted, when they're drafted, what system they're being put into, who their coach is, how they operate a defense, how they function with that position, all of that matters more than how talented they are. I know it sounds weird to say, but outside of the top, 15 pick guys, it's going to matter heavily where they are and how they're utilized outside of everything else that we want to say today on the pot. But hopefully we can predict some of those outcomes.
Yeah, and that's why we do this today, because you sit here and say, well, okay, if it doesn't matter, then why are you even talking about it? Well, because it's fun to talk about these guys from a pure talent perspective and then see how that lines up in a few months' time. And as you just said, guys in the top 15, it's not going to matter who they go to. Like these
Right.
are just stars in the making. And there's a couple of those at least that we're going to be talking about today. So with all of that said, we have 3 position groups to get into, Collin. So let's get started. Typically we'd start with D-line. And I'm wondering how you feel about starting with linebackers and building some suspense.
I think we should start with linebackers and end with the cream of the crop.
Okay. So top 3 linebackers. Before we get into it, do you have a general sense of this class? Do you think based on what you saw that this is a good linebacker class, or what do you think?
I thought that there were guys with traits in this linebacker class that I really liked. I thought that there were some pretty glaring weaknesses out of some guys. So I had a little bit of a mixed opinion. Like if these guys get coached up, they could be really good, but I could also see a pretty easy path to, this guy just never really, cut his teeth and figured it out. So I had a little bit of a mixed opinion on the linebacker class. What about you?
I think same. I think generally I would say it was pretty good. And I think it comes with the caveat of I think there's a lot of really solid players, like a lot of solid linebacker options. I don't think there's a star necessarily in this bunch. I think we thought coming into the year that might be Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins tears his ACL during the season and opts to return to LSU. So no Harold Perkins. That is a big loss to this overall group of players, but we had a lot of guys emerge, I think, through the season. And it's kind of an exciting crew. I know sometimes it's pretty hit or miss with linebackers, and we've had a couple of classes that weren't entirely inspiring for linebacker talent in the couple of years we've been doing this. So I think this class has potential to maybe produce some legitimate fantasy starters within the first couple of years. So with that said, number 3, your number 3. I'm going to hand the ball to you.
I am going to say a name that we've said before on Camp Dynasty, somebody that is not necessarily new to the program, somebody that we, brought up, I think, preseason last year, and that's Clemson linebacker Barrett Carter. Do you have him in your top 3?
He did not make my top 3, but an oldie but a goodie. That is Barrett Carter.
So Barrett Carter is an off-ball linebacker. He's 6'1", 230, so about a good size for a linebacker. I mean, we have been through the downsizing of the linebacker position over the last couple of years at Camp Dynasty, where we're like, well, 245 is the benchmark, and now maybe 235 is the benchmark, because that's, we went through the whole list last year, and we're like, oh, every good linebacker is like 230, 235. So
it's hilarious because literally when we first started talking about Barrett Carter, it was like, well, he's 230, he's pretty small.
Yeah.
And now, like 2 years later, it's like, yeah, he's fine. He's prototypical size.
Exactly. Carter is one of the more bursty athletes I think I watched. He gets downhill in a hurry. He pursues the ball. He has a really high motor in pass rush. He's not a great pass rusher off the blitz. He doesn't have a ton of moves. But if he is unblocked, he's getting to the quarterback in a hurry, and he finishes those plays. He had 4 sacks this year, had 4 sacks last year. So not, not Edgerrin Cooper numbers, but I actually saw a similar athletic profile to Cooper, where he is fast, he pursues, he gets downhill, and he finishes at the quarterback. Now, if you made Edgerrin Cooper smaller and a little worse at football, I think you get Barrett Carter.
Yeah, unfortunately, well, first of all, I do still like Barrett Carter. Like, yeah. I think Barrett Carter is, I don't know, like, in the grand scheme of it, where he ends up on my list, but he just has not progressed in the ways that I was hoping that he would. And this extends now over multiple seasons, where we're watching him, we're waiting for him, going back to, preseason last year, 2 years ago for the 2024 class, him and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And it's like, you're sitting there like, man, I love the athlete, love the range, love the sideline to sideline speed that he brings. Just need him to clean up a few areas, and it feels like he has yet to do that in a couple of years of action. So, namely, missed tackles. I feel like that is still a concern of his. He gets the missed tackle rate down to 10% this year, but that's down from 20%, and it's still a little bit higher than you'd be looking for. And I think it just shows up on film too, where he's a smaller, lighter player, hyper athletic, but doesn't show up in those one-on-one contact scenarios where he's using his speed and athleticism to consistently wrap guys and make strong tackles. So that's one area for him. Also, coverage, I feel like, has been an area that I've always kind of wanted a little bit more from him, especially given his athleticism and the fact that he's smaller. He's always left me wanting a little bit more there. And it, according to his PFF grades, at least, which we do reference with IDPs, his coverage grades have gone down for the last 3 years consecutively. So that's an area where it doesn't seem like he is showing much improvement top to bottom. So, but that all being said, like I started this by saying, I do like Carter. I think he's probably a late day 2, early day 3 sort of a linebacker that's a little projecty and has plenty of upside left in the tank.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's definitely not a guy you are plugging in day 1 in your offense, mostly because of the coverage stuff. Because that was the biggest red flag for me, where he hasn't gotten much better out of coverage. I think like he has some coverage instincts that you can build on with good coaching, but I don't think he's getting good coaching at the linebacker position with this Clemson defense, and I think you can see that with the regression in his coverage stats. And so you got to be able to cover over the middle of the field. If you're going to be 6'1", 230, you also better be a good coverage linebacker, because you are undersized and you tend to miss some tackles, and you can get bounced back a little bit when you're hitting somebody. So you better be able to run with tight ends. You better be able to, close up that mid-read part of the field. So that was the biggest thing for me too that needs to get coached up for this player. But I think he could be a guy that you can rely on to throw out there and have him cover sideline to sideline and hawk people down.
Former 5-star athlete Barrett
Yep.
Carter. He's a freak show. So if he puts it together, look out. My
Your
number three is Danny Stutsman.
Okay.
Did he make your list?
He did not.
So we briefly touched on Stutsman, I think, before the year, more in terms of being an honorable mention. He'd been coming off of a very productive season at Oklahoma, over 100 tackles last year. This year, I thought he looked really good, specifically against the run. This is going to be your kind of prototypical IDP linebacker. Like he struggles in coverage. Like that's the biggest glaring weakness in his game right now. The question you have to ask yourself with Stutsman, and this is obviously independent of where he goes in the NFL draft, because that might answer the question for you. How much are you willing to bet that his coverage skills aren't bad enough that he won't get yanked off the field
right
enough to put up the numbers he's going to put up if he's on the field? Because we all know that bad linebackers, or the not elite linebackers, let's say, put up fantasy numbers, and this is that sort of player. Excellent against the run, great instincts, incredible athlete, actually. Like I wasn't even expecting him to be this level of an athlete. Kind of, we talk about preconceived ideas of players, and I'm not going to say why I would have thought that, but you can guess. But he's 6'4", 240, and man, he gets downhill in a blink of an eye, and he can get sideline to sideline, fills his run gaps really well. Great instincts, like I said, to sniff it out. He's always near the ball. It feels like he is always a heat-seeking missile downhill at the ball carrier. And this is a guy who's going to lay the boom. I think there's a lot of linebackers in this new era of linebacking that when you're 230 pounds, you're not laying the lumber like a lot of these throwback guys. Stutsman is a little bit of a throwback in that sense, where when he gets downhill and he gets his body on you, you're going to be moving backwards. So I love the floor that Stutsman provides. And honestly, there's a ceiling here too with how athletic he is. It'll just be a question of, can he continue to develop in coverage where he's not a liability at the NFL level?
Yeah, the tiebreaker, it was between Carter and Stutsman for me for my number 3 spot, and I also thought Stutsman would be a good run defender. He's going to be, if he can be on the field enough to be a tackle machine, like he could absolutely be that kind of role. A guy that gets, 100 tackles pretty easily if he's seeing enough snaps. The issues, I guess, that were laid out for me were the change of direction. I feel like was pretty slow, and like if he bites on something, I feel like he's late coming back the other way, and I just felt like there was a lot of where a guy that's more athletic, that has like say Barrett Carter, where he can like stick his foot in the ground and go and close that distance and secure the tackle, while Stutsman is going to fill the gap and you're going to feel him. Barrett Carter's not that guy. So like,
right.
It's just like the pros and cons of, can Stutsman be like Josie Jewell? I think he absolutely can be. And like that's where a guy, Josie Jewell can get like 130 tackles. So that's the ceiling for me. And the floor seems pretty solid too. So I guess the push and the pull of like, what do you want out of linebacker? I guess I'm looking at the ceiling of Carter feels a little higher, but I also, the floor of Stutsman seems higher. So what are you going to go for?
And that's a great point too, because I think in terms of IDP, these like pure floor guys, they're not getting drafted in most cases. Like you're going to get guys post round 4 or on the wire in your leagues if guys aren't paying attention pretty easily. So that's why I say, where does the NFL take Stutsman? Like, where do they value this skill set, which I think is extremely fantasy friendly? But if he's a late day 3 guy, or if he ends up in round 4, round 5, like, I don't know that you have to prioritize him, and I don't know that he ends up, being in this spot on Dynasty draft night as linebacker 3. But he's a player that I want on my fantasy team. Let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah. It's a similar idea to, like, I guess, how we felt about Jeremiah Trotter last year, and we're like, well, we'll see where the NFL takes him. And then he goes in like the 6th round or something like that. And it's like, oh, don't really love that. Like, oh, maybe like keep an eye on him because the Eagles don't have a lot of linebackers. And then he does nothing. And that's one end of the spectrum. So hopefully this turns out on the other end.
So number 2 for you is?
Number 2 for me is Jay Higgins, linebacker, Iowa. Do you have him on your list?
I do not.
Okay. So Jay Higgins, 6'2", 232, was a really, really good linebacker for Iowa this year. He's a very good athlete, had a ton of tackles. A guy that gets downhill, is a good all-around backer, I think. Had a 91.5 coverage grade via PFF. And, I mean, finishes tackles. He sniffs out a lot of plays. I feel like he doesn't trust his eyes and his instincts as much as he should. I think that's my biggest red flag with him is, like, you can see him wanting to go, like, I need to pull the trigger and go. But he's, like, trusting the like coaching and the play call, and, like, I got to sit and just in case it's play action, but there's sometimes you just need to pull the trigger and go. And that is something that I feel like can be unlocked in a player where you just get more reps at the position. This is his 5th year at Iowa, but he's only a 2-year starter as they do at Iowa. He started as a senior and then in his 5th year. So I was just pretty impressed with him. He seems like the type of guy that Stutsman is for Oklahoma, where he's a guy that will be a good run defender, but he's also like a pretty good athlete in pass coverage. I think he can have cement feet every once in a while where I'm like, oh, I don't love that you're not, like, I need you to go sometimes. And that I guess that's my biggest thing is it seems like I'm hesitating a little too often. I don't want to, like, fire off the blocks. And if we can get over whether that's like a mental block or like someone in his ear telling him, like, get through that and just go and be a heat-seeking missile, I feel like this can be a incredible linebacker. But I think where he's at right now, he's still very good.
Yeah, I didn't watch him, so I'm gonna dive in and see what we have here with Jay Higgins. This was a player that we did mention, I believe, coming into the year because, and I think it was in the same breath as Danny Stutsman, which was 2 players coming off of really productive seasons, one at Oklahoma, one at Iowa. So, yeah, definitely curious about Higgins now, knowing that he's this high on your list.
Yeah, he had 171 tackles last year, 124 this year. Doesn't really get to the quarterback. He had 4 interceptions this season. So that's the type of guy that we're talking about.
I'm curious if you watched my number 2 guy.
Okay.
Carson Schwesinger.
No.
I hope I'm saying the last name correctly. Schwesinger.
Okay.
Schwesinger. So this is a linebacker from UCLA. He will be at the Senior Bowl, and that is, I think, where the buzz maybe started to generate around this name. And I had heard enough noise about this player that I felt I needed to watch him. And I really had no expectations, didn't really know who he was. Saw he was 6'2", 225. And so I'm like, I mean, what is this guy, a safety? Like, what are we talking about here? He's a freak. Like he's an absolute freak of nature. I mean, a crazy story too when you put on this year's film and think about the fact that this was a walk-on to this team and he hadn't played for the last 2 years. Like gets to UCLA in 2022, doesn't play. Like he's got like under 100 or just over 100 total snaps coming into this season. And he starts this year and is one of the best defensive players in college football. Second in the country in total tackles at 225 pounds. And he is like a lightning rod. I mean, it is like insane watching him fly around the field. And it's what really sold me, because I was still skeptical. I saw the movement skills. I saw the fluidity. The hips are incredibly fluid. Like you watch this player in coverage. He's a natural in that area of the game because he's just so damn athletic. But he is not routinely getting outmatched when he is on blocks or at the point of contact against larger running backs or running backs that are about the same size as him. Like I expected to see a player that was anytime he's at the line of scrimmage and a guard is getting their hands on him, that he's just going to be immobilized. And that's not what I saw. Sure, the strength is not going to be there in the same manner as it is with some of the other players we're talking about. And that would include Stutsman and a lot of these other linebackers that are a little bit bigger. But I think the athletic upside that he gives you, coupled with his instincts as a linebacker, which are very good. I mean, he's playing extremely fast because he understands where he needs to be. He understands where the ball carrier is going to be, how to take that angle, how to, bounce gaps and fill in the place where he needs to be. And he's doing it all at 100 miles an hour because he's that athletic that he can pull that off. So I was incredibly impressed with this player. Despite the size limitations, I don't see any reason to doubt him at this point when we saw the sort of numbers that he was putting up this year at UCLA.
I've watched a few clips. I just popped it on his game against Penn State. And first takeaways from a minute and a half of this tape is he is really quick. I mean, you talk about a guy that can get in and out and like kind of bob and weave through the defense. He has really good feet and he's really active all the time. And it seems like he can track down things that are outside of maybe his quote unquote responsibility.
Yes.
Because I see a zone coverage play here and he's sitting midfield and then he sees Tyler Warren leak out on like a wheel route and he's just going there. Like Tyler Warren's going to get the catch, but he's like, I'm making sure this guy doesn't score. And I like that a lot because that's how you bolster those tackle numbers, which we, need in the IDP world. And so it seems high motor, high athleticism, and this is off just 2 minutes. So take it with a grain of salt. But
it's kind of fun. Some live tape review. That's kind of fun. But yeah, I mean, as long as his strength limitations at this point in his career, at least, like, don't make him, don't immobilize him at the NFL level. Like, he's got a lot of those skills that you're looking for with a guy that's going to cover ground, that's going to always be around the ball and, probably add a few interceptions along the way as well.
All right.
All right. So number one.
Yeah. I'm interested to see if we have the same number one.
Maybe we do.
So I have Jalon Walker.
Okay. I don't.
Okay.
But that's because I don't know what to do with it.
That was the conversation that I was going to bring up here with Jalon Walker. And so I think we feel the same about him, where it's like he plays on the line a lot and he's pretty good on the line. He played 250 snaps on the line, 311 snaps in the box. So it's about a 50-50 split for this player. And I don't know if he's a great off-ball linebacker. I don't know if he's a great pass rusher, but the reason I put him here is because I liked him better off-ball than I did him on-ball, and so I think a team will take that and use him in like maybe 75-25 off-ball to on-ball split and really like hammer home the rules of off-ball linebacker and like try to fully convert him and then have him, be on ball every once in a while, certain packages just to keep him on the field because this guy is a freak at 6'2", 245. Like this is a big linebacker that moves like one of these little guys. He gets, because they play him on the line a lot, but he also drops into coverage off of the line of scrimmage a lot, and he'll fall back into zone coverage and just completely negate plays that should be open there. That's your hot read, and he'll get a couple interceptions off of that in due time because of, how reads go. And you think 6 guys are coming off a sim pressure, and then Walker drops back and you're dropping it into his hands. So I liked how he looked enough as an off-ball guy to believe that a team will bet on the skills and the tools and the athleticism. And if they end up putting him at D lineman, then maybe this conversation shifts a little bit and we put him in the D line rankings, which is a little bit more crowded. But I think he stood out enough to me athletically to deserve a spot up here.
Yeah, I'm glad you did rank him on this list because I wasn't sure what to do about what you're kind of hearing with this player, which is that, like you said, they're playing him at both positions this year at Georgia pretty equally, actually. The snaps breakout where he's 249 on the line and 311 off. So, literally almost a split there. But the projection seems to be that he's going to play edge rusher in the NFL, or that's where teams view him as a better prospect because of his athleticism and because of the size and because of the flashes that you get on his film as an edge rusher. But I agree with you. I thought he looks better as an off-ball linebacker because I think his athleticism is more of a weapon at that position considering how raw he is as a pass rusher right now. So yeah, you could develop him. He can be another one of these Georgia guys where you're trying to develop him into a, serious pass rusher, a guy that flashes and has the traits and all of that. But I'm like, why not just stick the big physical athletic player at linebacker and let him be kind of a weapon for you. So if he is drafted by an NFL team and it appears that he will be playing off the ball, then I would definitely have him in my top 3 in this class, undoubtedly. And that's not to say that he is an elite off-ball linebacker prospect. I don't believe that is the case either. He is an imperfect prospect on that side as well. However, you see the traits, you see the flashes, you see him, doing things at this size, like you said, that players 20 pounds lighter than him are, doing at about the same speed. So,
right. So who's your number 1?
My number 1 is Jihaad Campbell.
Okay.
So we talked about Campbell during the season, gave him a badge after, I believe, his performance against LSU, I want to say, because that was, that's one of the games where, you turn it on and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a freak. Another player in a similar fashion to Jalon Walker in the sense that they are playing him at Alabama at multiple positions, but I think Campbell is a much easier sell as an off-ball linebacker with pass rush skills. Like, you're not going to develop him. He's 6'3", 244. I don't think you're going to, if you're an NFL team, you're going to look at him and be like, yeah, we're going to turn this guy into a freaky edge player. I think his skills at off-ball are just really, really high. And he is the level of an athlete where, like we were talking about with Walker, like he can be a dominant player at that position. But he's also going to give you some pass rush upside. He had 20 pressures, 8 sacks this year. A few of those sacks are coming up the middle, though. He's blitzing, A gap blitzes from the middle linebacker position. So it's not all off the edge where he's making his or getting his production as a pass rusher. But as a linebacker, very athletic, very rangy, has a nose for the ball. You see that he's a playmaker, and that's something that I really value at this position, especially when you're talking about guys where split the difference from a fantasy perspective. It might not be very much. I'm looking for a guy that's going to fill the stat sheet in a number of ways. You see him make plays in coverage. I think he's pretty good there. The instincts are pretty good in coverage. He had 2 picks or 1 pick this year, 2 pass breakups. But you see him making plays in that area. And then you see him making plays behind the line of scrimmage as well. He had 65 stops for this Alabama team. That was one of the highest numbers in the nation this year. So he's playing behind or beside Deontay Lawson, who went back to school. Campbell opts to enter into the draft, and I think he is the best linebacker of the bunch.
Yeah, I started watching Deontay Lawson before I looked up if he declared or not. And I actually was like, man, 11 is making a lot of plays here. And so then I ended up watching Jihaad, and I was like, yeah, this guy is a really good athlete. Like he kind of gives me a little bit of Isaiah Pacheco sometimes, though. Like I feel like he's doing a lot and he's not doing as much as he looks like he's doing.
Yeah.
But he is a really strong player. You see that a lot of the time when he's on the line of scrimmage and like when he gets his hands on a tackle and the tackle's moving backwards. And then just the running out to go cover like these bubble screens and all the different smoke and mirrors that college teams run. He is pursuing the ball like a bat out of hell. So I definitely enjoyed watching the tape. It feels like this is a high motor player with really good athleticism and a high ceiling because of those two things combined. I think there are some instincts and some like eye stuff that he needs to clean up. I feel like he's biting on play action a lot, and that affects like his coverage skills a little bit. He needs to stay home in those reads sometimes, and then because he's very much like I was talking about Jay Higgins a little bit, where he's a little gun shy to pull the trigger. I feel like he's the opposite, where he's like, I'm going. And like, if I make a mistake, I'm making it at 110 miles per hour. Like we are going to make something happen on this play. And a lot of times that works out. A lot of times, like he is disrupting a play. And like you said, getting those pressures up the middle of the defense. But sometimes they can get you in trouble.
Yeah, he's definitely, and this is the thing where I think he is not a finished product, of course. And I think he is probably the best chance, maybe alongside Jalon Walker, where these two guys are kind of similar, both pretty developmental at this point at this position, where these are you're going to be your best bets for like a star linebacker in this group, I think. But he's not there yet. So I think this is a player that probably goes in the second round of the NFL draft. Like, I don't think we're going to get a first round linebacker, and, we'll see kind of the scheme that he ends up in. But I agree with you. I think there is definitely some, the little bit of roughness around the edges right now, but you love the athlete. You love some of the flashes that you get in all areas of the field. So,
yep.
All right. So that's linebackers. D lineman.
Here we go.
Also known as, I think we could probably, well, maybe not. We can. We've thrown some D tackles in the past. I don't know about this class. There's some good ones, but I don't know if they're like pass rusher, like Jalon Carter-esque D tackles or interior defensive linemen. And in this class specifically, there is no shortage of edge players that you could dive into and try to figure out what they offer from an IDP perspective. So with that said, number 3.
So yeah, number 3 for me is Nic Scourton out of Texas A&M.
Okay. He did not make my top 3.
Okay. So I believe we brought him up through the season at points. Scourton is a big edge player. This is a 6'4", 285-pound edge, and he wreaks havoc because he's pretty nimble for a big guy. The spin move is something that he has in his repertoire. The bull rush he goes to pretty often, and that works out. He transfers his weight into power pretty well. He has a decent bend for his size. It's not astonishing, which I wouldn't expect it to be for a guy that's going to be a power rusher mainly. He holds 2 gaps pretty well. He's not getting out of position very often. He does a pretty good job containing, which is impressive for his size because, I mean, it's pretty easy to, I mean, you'd think to outrun a 285-pound edge, but he, flattens him out and pushes him to the sideline pretty well. I wish I could see him pass rush more over the guards because I feel like, he has the size to do it. The A&M just didn't ask him to do it a ton, but when, he does, it looks pretty good. And so a guy that can play, I think, 2 different positions on the defensive line and can win at both of them. I was just pretty impressed with Scourton.
Yeah, I think he's definitely, one of the many players that you could certainly include in a list like this. Like, I think there's no shortage of edge guys. And in many cases, especially at this spot, I would maybe say the top true names are probably maybe in a class of their own, but I guess that's maybe up for debate as well. But like at this spot, I think there's no shortage of names, and Scourton would definitely be one in that conversation. I just this year, like the production fell off a little bit at Texas A&M. I think you maybe saw him kind of leveling out a little bit, and I wonder what the upside is with Scourton versus some of these other players. But that being said, I think he's put a little bit more on film than a couple of the other names that you could throw in that are more developmental edge guys or, transitioning from other positions, like another player we could talk about maybe in honorable mentions, I would assume. But I like Scourton's game. The spin move, that was a fun watch in the summer, like getting ready, seeing his Purdue film, see the 280-pound guy hit the spin move, was like, damn, who is this freak show? So yeah, I think he's certainly a name to watch, potential round 1, sort of edge prospect for the NFL.
Yeah, he put up pretty good film against Notre Dame, who has, one of the best O-lines in the league, some of the best tackles are in the league. What do you call college? In college football, There
it is.
So I liked that, and he hit one of those signature spin moves that led to a sack in that game against Notre Dame, and it's like, all right, we're doing it against these guys. I'd like to see you do it against, some of the random teams that you play, but at least we're showing up against the big boys,
So I kind of went out on a limb a little bit with number 3.
Appreciate that.
I watched a handful of guys, and nobody made me feel a thing like this player did, so I stuck him at 3. And I'm not sure how to feel about it yet. But I have Mike Green at number 3.
Okay.
Marshall's Mike Green, talked about him, gave him a badge right at the end of the college football season. And that was, in part due to a great game and in part due to the fact that we needed to get Mike Green's name into the show because this was your leading player in terms of sacks in college football this season, playing at Marshall. And so, there's two ways to look at that. He's playing at Marshall. Who is he playing against? Southern Mississippi, LA Monroe, Georgia State. But the other way to look at it is that he played against Ohio State this year. He had a sack in that game. He had some pretty ridiculous reps in that game. And when you watch the rest of his film, or at least what I watched of his film from this year, this is a player that has no shortage of moves in his bag and has the athleticism to pull all of them off. 6'4", 248. So I guess a little bit, quote unquote, undersized, but I think, as with every other position group, it feels like these edge players get, under 250 every year, and it's like, whatever. Mike Green is definitely a player, though, that, at 248, his speed and burst is exceptional. And I think what you see is, a very deep bag of pass rush moves. So I'm just going to say, why not Mike Green? I get that it's Marshall, and he's going to be at the Senior Bowl, and we're going to be able to clear up some of those conceptions, like right there. Like, how does he look against the tackles there? Because if he looks like he did on film this year, there's nothing stopping this player from being one of the first edge players taken in the draft.
Yeah, I really liked Mike Green's film. The only thing preventing me from putting him at number 3 was just that, like, he had 17 sacks, but like, I guess it's similar to the Genty conversation, but because he still did it against the good teams and he did it against the bad teams, but he did it in a dominant fashion over the bad teams. So maybe I'm looking at him the wrong way, but he had one rep that I do still remember that he completely, like, it was against Virginia Tech, and he shut down a play completely where he comes off the edge and Virginia Tech's quarterback's looking left for like a quick throw, and he jumps the passing lane, so the quarterback has to tuck it, and he lands and then like hawks down the quarterback and gets a half sack on the play. And it's like, okay, like that's normal, right? So he does do some like freakish things, and he has, like you said, a deep bag of pass rush moves that he can get into. So I want to see like you're talking about the Senior Bowl stuff, where he's going to end up in the NFL draft, that kind of stuff, because I'm a little curious about what the NFL is going to think about him, and if this is real production or beating up on, future school teachers.
You don't see the ghost move in college very often. At least I haven't, from a lot of the guys we've watched over the last few years. Mike Green is hitting ghost moves on, like, these kids from, whatever Sun Belt school he's playing against. Like, they don't even know what they're looking at. Like, he's just absolutely taking them to school, like Von Miller, like vintage Von Miller with the ghost move. So
if you're curious what a ghost move is, it's when he disappears like a phantom and then reappears behind the quarterback.
Alt and he transports into the backfield. He's flashing his hands, and the tackle goes to put their hands on him, and then he just dips underneath, and it's like he's, a ghost, and that's where it comes from. But
there it is.
Made famous by Von Miller. So, all right. Let's get into the top 2. I'm thinking they're going to be the same.
I hope so.
Maybe not the same order, but
okay.
Number 2.
We have James Pearce, right?
We do.
Okay. That makes me feel a little better. So James Pearce had a little bit of a down year this year statistically. And some people, so we came into this year very, very high on James Pearce. We were talking about James Pearce going to be the number 1 pick in this draft because there's no quarterback that's going to take that spot. Things have changed from then to now, but the tape didn't change as much as I thought it was going to. So James Pearce, 6'5", 243. He had 13 sacks last year. Came down to 8 this year. And I just said the statistics go down, but the tape looks pretty similar. He had almost double the hurries this year that he did last year. And the reason that the sack numbers are down and the QB hit numbers are down is, to me, it looked like teams are just straight game planning with James Pearce in mind. It's like, if you watch the Georgia tape, it is screens. It is anytime they're dropping back to pass, he is getting either double team or he's getting chipped or he's getting cut. Like, there is no play where 27 is not on Georgia's mind. And that to me was like, okay, this is just like, you're getting the star treatment from the other team. And I think that's carried throughout the season. But the speed to power is still there. And I feel like he added a little extra in the power category because, I mean, he just bulldozes guys and sits them into the quarterback's lap. He has great bend for, I guess not for his size because he's not like a huge player, but he has incredible bend. Like, this is a freakish athlete that can get it done around the edge or just standing straight up with a tackle and planting them in the backfield.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, because he lost the number one spot doesn't mean I think he lost much in terms of year to year on film. I don't think he necessarily took the jump I was maybe hoping to see on film from him in terms of kind of completing his repertoire as a pass rusher. But I think part of that too is like, he just has a very unusual build. And I think he's always going to be a little bit more specialized, but what he does and how he wins is so like already great that it doesn't really matter. Like, he's 243 and he's incredibly lanky. Like, it's almost like strange to see him like on the edge and moving guys. Like, and part of that is his length. He's 6'5", and the arms are, very long. He goes to the bull rush, the stab, like, he's moving tackles back with ease on those moves. So the 243 is not affecting his strength necessarily, and a lot of that is just how he converts speed to power on those moves. But then, outside of that, with the more speed finesse stuff, I mean, he's got that too. He loves to go to the inside counter moves. Like, he loves to jump back inside, and he'll do like a rip on the inside shoulder. And, sometimes it, with varying results, I think he is still definitely like working through some of that stuff actively, but the fact that he's been as productive as he is and looks as impressive as he does with, a pretty varied attack, at his size is very impressive. So I think he is incredibly high ceiling. I think, we haven't seen the best of James Pearce yet, and what we have seen is already pretty damn good.
Yeah, absolutely. He's going to go, I think, higher than predicted right now in the NFL draft because a team's going to fall in love with the athleticism that they're seeing and the already established pass rush repertoire, and then the potential of adding on to that what could be a very special player.
So we thought James Pearce would develop himself into being the number one overall pick in the draft because there's no quarterback, and who else could it be? I'm not sure that number one is going to be the number one pick in the draft. In fact, I would highly doubt it, but I do think one edge player developed himself into a number one overall caliber player, and that is Abdul Carter.
I agree.
I mean, to think about where we were coming into the season, where Carter was in our top threes as a player that hadn't played edge full time yet, like, you were baking in the projection based off of the fact that you knew he was going to edge and what you saw in the reps that he did have as a pass rusher at Penn State. That was already good enough to get him into the top 3. And this year was like, honestly, I was blown away. Like, I was like shocked at how much he developed that part of his game. Like, because obviously we know he's a great athlete, and the Michael Parsons, those sort of comps come up because of the school and the number and the background of linebacker to edge. I don't think it's insane to say it at this point that he's a potential Micah Parsons clone. Like,
I agree. Unfortunately, like, I didn't want to get there because like that's too easy. And it's like number 11 Penn State linebacker, converted edge rusher, But Abdul Carter's a freak of nature. Like, I came into his tape expecting some like bumps in the road because this is his first year full time playing edge. But instead, it's just like, oh, this is the best edge in the class.
Yeah, and like, pretty easily. I like James Pearce a lot, but like, I mean, this was different. Carter, his first step is just like unbelievable. He gets off the line of scrimmage in a way that is like, when you see it, you're like, oh, this is like the next great one. Like, this was like, I'm watching Will Anderson again. Like, this is the level of get off and speed to power that this player can convert. That being said, he honestly is more of a speed rusher. Like, he's not really going to the power stuff all that often yet. And I know that that's in his bag, and I know that he can develop that area and become like a truly unblockable behemoth off the edge. But right now, a lot of what he's doing is just using that first step and getting into the finesse moves, getting into the cross chop, getting into the speed rip, getting into the club rip. I mean, he is like unguardable when he gets to the edge because he's at the tackle's shoulder at his side before he can even react. And at that point, it's already too late to get your hands on him. And he's already shown an ability to get tackles' hands off of him. And even when they do land their hands, he has the athleticism to just completely fight through it, like mid-play. Like, he's like ripping a guy, he's getting pushed down, he's losing his balance, and he's still climbing through that block, getting into the pocket, getting hands on the quarterback. It's an incredible watch, an incredible skill set for a player that is so new to the position that, I mean, like, he's one of the best players in the draft, unquestionably. Could be the number 1 overall pick. If we weren't, in a situation where quarterback likely goes number 1, even in a class like this. But unbelievable player.
Yeah, I don't know if I've scouted somebody with better flexibility and like creativity with pass rush moves and balance, because there are times he gets like so low in his pass rush when he's going for like a dip move, and he'll get like, I mean, he looks like he's like bear crawling to the quarterback and then he'll like spring back up in the backfield. And it's like, good God, this guy is like the most explosive player on the field down to down, but he's also like freakishly like flexible, and like the bend is outrageous. And then like a few counter moves on top of that. And then the strength to just like stand up guys and not get moved off his spot. There are times where he'll get ahead of himself because he's like almost like feels giddy to like get there and then, lean forward a little bit. But the bad plays are few and far between compared to the exceptional plays that he makes.
And just getting better throughout the season. Also, I think anybody watching the playoff, it's no surprise how much of an impact he made down the stretch for them. that Notre Dame game, 8 pressures. I mean, he was just a wrecking ball in that game. So sky really is the limit. I know we like to say that a lot with pass rushers, these athletic freaks that are still developing, but like to see this level of development in 1 year, it's pretty nuts to think about where this player's going.
Yep.
So that's D-line.
C-line.
And that leaves DBs.
Mm-hmm.
So your number 3.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce his name. Let me look it up real quick. Because
South Carolina guy?
Yeah.
Emmanwori?
Yep.
I think that's how you say
Emmanwori. So I've seen Emmanwori comped to Kyle Hamilton. I wouldn't go quite there because Kyle Hamilton was a special player, but he does have range and he is a great tackler, and that's what we're looking for out of DBs. Is he in your DB list?
So there's like 2 DBs.
Yeah.
Well, 2.5 kind of.
Right.
If we can talk about Travis Hunter if you want, we don't have to, but
I was going to bring him up.
Like Emmanwori is one of 2. Yeah. And I think Malaki Starks is obviously the other one, and that's no surprise. But honestly, Emmanwori is like a freak. Like I was like, wow, watching him. Like his speed is insane.
At 6'3", 230.
Yeah, he's a big player, and he can. I'm curious to find out how he'll be used at the NFL level, because his ball skills are great. Obviously, the range of the athleticism is great, but like his size and his skills, like moving downhill and playing in the box. I mean, like this is kind of a weapon potentially in the making, and I'm not sure where he ends up, but I was very interested by Emmanwori.
I'm not sure if it's like super common or not, but he had like 26 more solo tackles than assisted tackles. And like, I know that's easier for a DB because you're in one-on-one situations a lot. But if you play IDP, we value solo tackles more than assisted tackles. And so to have 57 solo tackles alone, 88 total tackles, 4 interceptions, 2 for touchdowns, like this is a playmaker across the field. So he's definitely one of the names to watch. My 3 were, Emmanwori, Starks, and Travis Hunter. So
yeah,
that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and Emmanwori 413 snaps in the box versus 193 at free safety at South Carolina. So assuming that is a role that will carry with him to the NFL, that's something to keep your eye on for sure, especially for a player that had 4 picks this year. And the one against LSU, I can't remember if it got called back by a penalty, but he catches it at the goal line, and like you can see him take a second or a half second to be like, should I run this out right now? And then he just houses it because he's so fast, like nobody could even dream of catching him. But so Malaki Starks is, as good as, as surprised and, encouraged as I was watching Emmanwori, I'm watching these Georgia players like Walker and Michael Williams, who we can talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
you're going to see 24 just all over the place. It's incredible. Unavoidable.
Yeah. I didn't know, like, I knew obviously Malaki Starks is good. If you watch college football, you know who Malaki Starks is, but taking the time to like isolate Starks and see exactly what he is, he's going to be a special player in the league that can play both deep and in the box. And that's the kind of guy that you want to, have in Dynasty. You talk about, I don't want to say the D word, Derwin James, but it's a the type of player that you want that can play all 3 downs. If you sub into your nickel package, he can come up into the box and play that linebacker role. And then, he's playing in every single set that you have because he's such a good run defender and he, makes these fits. And then he can also match up in man coverage with tight ends because he's strong enough, and with receivers occasionally. Like, Starks is a really, really good DB.
Yeah, this is the kind of player that just like doesn't come around all that often in terms of fantasy, especially where like a lot of times we're talking about DBs and it's like, yeah, whatever, like maybe take this guy in the 4th, or put a few guys on your watch list, and they might be like 2nd round NFL picks. I mean, like Tyler Nubin was like a 2nd round NFL pick, and you're taking him maybe in the 4th round. Maybe you don't even have to.
Good fantasy player.
And yeah, it worked out. Anybody who did, it worked out. But like the exponential curve for the like, where am I drafting a DB? It's just like, unless they're going top half of round 1, I'm not really going to sink a ton of, draft capital into them. This is the kind of player that you are going to have to do that. Like, he is potentially going to go first half of round 1, and he might be like a 2nd round IDP dynasty rookie pick. Like, I mean, that's how good he is. And I don't have I'm not comfortable like giving him a comp yet. I haven't studied him enough to do that. But I think, the goal is always Derwin James or Kyle Hamilton. Like, that's the goal with these players. And I think this is certainly one of those players. Like, he fits all the boxes, checks all the boxes that you're looking for that sort of a dominant fantasy asset at this position.
Yeah, 100%. You want guys that are going to have high draft capital sunk into them, obviously, because those guys are more than likely going to see the field. But more so, you want guys that are going to be playing a ton of snaps because they have more opportunities to impact the game on a down-to-down basis. And Starks is going to be on the field like 95+% of snaps because he can play at both levels of the field, as a box guy, as a coverage guy. So this is, one of the easiest scouting jobs that I've had where I'm like, yeah, this is a good player. Like, yeah, sorry. Like, the way he drives on routes, it's like, yeah, he's going to get, 70 something tackles and, 4 picks and, 3 sacks. Like, he's just going to do a little bit of everything.
And it's honestly like, it's not even just like his ability in coverage or his ability to get downhill and tackle. Like, he makes some of the most ridiculous plays also, like just pure, like pass deflections where he's jumping 40 inches into the air, or like diving interceptions. Like, he is just a freak all across, the entire board. And then obviously Travis Hunter is like worth bringing up here, because if he is a corner that plays receiver sometimes, which is kind of starting to feel like that's the vibe that we're getting, if there is a vibe to get right now, but that's kind of what it feels like to me. And if that's the case, what does it mean? And, I think we've kind of talked about this like adjacently when talking about him purely as a wide receiver. But if we think about him purely as a corner with offensive work, what does that do for you? Like, is he more valuable to you than, a handful of the offensive guys we've talked about?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because, we're all the people that are listening and us, we're in IDP leagues, and the question kind of hangs with Travis Hunter. Like, well, what is this going to look like? And I keep going back to, and again, I'll qualify it by saying I think Travis Hunter is a million times better than Taysom Hill. But when Taysom Hill is on the field, he's deployed because he's going to be touching the ball. And I think, like, if we have a role like that with Travis Hunter, then he is going to be a league-breaking defensive back. Like, he's going to be the type of guy where there's going to be rules in leagues. You can only start Travis Hunter at wide receiver. Like it's you're going to have some kind of punishment. You're not going to get your league payout if you start him at corner or whatever. So I think that's going to be the type of player that Travis Hunter is if he plays part-time wide receiver and full-time DB, because he's going to have like 40, 50 yards and a touchdown in some games, and then he's going to have like 28, 30 points as a fantasy player, and that's going to be coming out of your DB position, which famously is really hard to get right unless you have some of the top guys. So that's where I'm landing with Travis Hunter. If he's going to play both ways and it's going to be, the Deion Sanders with a little more offensive input, then I think it's going to be a little bit troubling for leagues to try to figure out how to navigate what exactly they're going to do with this kind of player.
I say let it ride.
I agree.
Like, you're not going to get this type of player maybe ever again. Like, that's feasible to say. So why not let him break the game then? And I hope he does. Like, I hope he plays enough wide receiver and has, if he's a full-time corner, he sure as hell is going to have DB eligibility. So why not just let it happen? And in that case, when that day comes, where does he go in a draft? And that's the question we've been asking for literally months. And I'm not sure that we've gotten, closer to that answer yet, because it's so puzzling as something we've never experienced before. But I mean, there's a handful of other DB names that we could bring up here. But at that point, it's just dudes saying names. Darts. So there's no other guys that I've watched enough to be like, hey, look out for Xavier Watts. He's playing in the Natty, but
Caleb Downs next year.
We'll go from Starks into Downs. That's fun.
Like that a lot.
That's fun. So that is IDPs. That is a high level view at sort of what we can expect with the incoming IDP class. I should have said this at the beginning, but I'll say it now. Our scoring settings, the ones that we operate under, are in the description of the episode so that you understand kind of where we are approaching things from. Typically, with our scoring settings, tier 1 edge is going to be the sort of cream of the crop of these classes. So like Abdul Carter and James Pearce, I think, would be players that I'm looking at in my tier 1 of IDPs here. And then it kind of opens up a little bit. And I think you can throw names like even Malaki Starks into that second tier, and maybe some of the tier 2 edge guys, maybe even get into some of the tier 1 linebackers. Like, it's kind of a fun IDP class that I'm kind of interested to see how it materializes over time, because I think you could have a situation where, a decent chunk of the second round of Dynasty rookie drafts is like IDP picks, which isn't what we had last year. So,
do you have any quick honorable mentions before we go?
So yes, there is. Well, first of all, there's a ton of edge names that we could just throw out there as honorable mentions, guys that are getting first round NFL buzz. The name that I will throw out is Mykel Williams, who I referenced earlier, which it falls in the same bucket as Jalon Walker on this Georgia defense, where he's playing a position at Georgia that it doesn't seem like he's going to play in the NFL. And in Walker and Williams's cases, it's edge that they that the NFL is viewing them as. In Williams' case, that makes a little bit more sense to me. 265, he's playing defensive end in the 3-4, the 3-3-2 scheme that they, or 3-3-5 scheme that they run.
There's not enough players.
Yeah, I was like, where'd the other players go? But so what I saw was like not a ton. Like, I can see it. I can understand the desire. Obviously, this is not the position you'd want him to play in the NFL. He's going to be developmental at edge. And that's the thing where it's like, is he going top 10 in the NFL draft? Because in that case, I'm not sure I love that. But if he's going top 20, then okay, he's kind of fun. He's traitsy. But from an IDP perspective, I think we tend to fade these sorts of players a little bit more because they will lose their value quicker. If you're looking at a player that is developmental on the IDP side, I mean, I can think of a few examples of, one of them went number 1 overall and he played on this Georgia defense. And I think you could have got that player, Jalon Walker, for pretty cheap before he ultimately did break out. Yeah. So, and then the other name I do want to throw out there on the linebacker front is a player that I could not find enough film on to make an opinion of him, but a name that I've heard quite a bit, Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. And I'm always interested by these South Carolina linebackers because, Darius Leonard once upon a time changed the game, and Ernest Jones after him. So Demetrius Knight seems to be the next South Carolina linebacker to keep your eyes on. There's just not much out there right now. And I think he will be at the Senior Bowl as well, so that we'll have a chance to talk about him a little bit more over the next couple weeks.
And then one of the main characters of the college football season, Jack Sawyer, exists in this S class. The reason, if you're like, man, Jack Sawyer just like got them to the Natty, true. I think he's a little bit of a low ceiling guy. I think he's like a little bit stiff, but a really high motor, a good set of tools, and a sound player, I would say, at the both the point of attack and at the finishing point. So that's another guy to look out for that I'm sure everybody's heard of and is wondering, so where's Jack Sawyer? So
yeah, Sawyer had a great year. I think really built on the skills that he showed last year, but I'd agree. I'm not sure that he's quite there yet when we're talking just pure IDPs,
especially in an edge class like this.
Right. And I mean, you could even throw Tui Maloau in there as well. That's a name we've talked about for a couple of years. I'm not sure where he ends up sitting from an IDP front. I think he's a player that did, kind of help himself after going back to school, and maybe he does end up as a first round edge player. But again, there might be 8 of those this year. Right. So from IDP perspective, we understand that the field shrinks a little bit, and the value, there's value to be had outside of just your rookie drafts. And we'll get to talk a lot about that as we progress through this process. So for now, we'll leave it there. That is your IDP class, a little bit of a preview maybe of 2025, what it could bring, and also a good kind of segue into what's coming up next, I think, because we're going to get to see a lot of these guys at the Senior Bowl, and that's the next stop somehow, because it's already coming up in like 2 weeks.
What a world. I can't believe we're getting into real draft season where it's going to be the Senior Bowl, and then it'll be, the combine and pro days, and then the draft will be right around the corner.
It's insane how quickly it all comes. And the Senior Bowl is really the first moment. That's when it gets very real.
Yep.
And so that's coming up soon. Next week, we will be doing our Senior Bowl preview. I have some tape I need to watch in between now and then of guys that will be there. And we've talked a lot about some of the wide receivers that are going to be there. The running back list was also pretty interesting. Scadaboo has all 22 up right now, so I'll be watching some of that. There's a lot to do over the next few weeks here, but we will preview the Senior Bowl next week. In the meantime, if you enjoyed our discussion about IDPs for 2025, wrapping up Rankings 2.0 for this year, be sure to find us on Twitter, @camp_dynasty, and follow us there. TikTok, Undertaker GIF. It's not dead yet, I guess. So you can head over there at camp.
I gotta see if I can still post on that thing. I don't know if how that'll work.
I have no idea what's going on.
Find
anymore.
out tomorrow.
Yeah. And if you are listening on the pod feed, like, rate, review, subscribe, and share here. We appreciate that. And also head over to YouTube, or if you're watching over there, you're already here, hit subscribe, hit like, do all those things, because we very much appreciate that as well.
Yeah. Quinshon Judkins just punched in his second touchdown of the night, 28-7 Buckeyes, looking like it might be an Ohio State championship. I don't want to call it early, but it looks like they got Notre Dame boxed up after the scripted first drive. OHIO.
They deserve it. They deserve it. What a cast of characters. Travion, he's having a hell of a playoff run here too. A lot of
campers on that team.
Yeah. Wow. So, well, congrats to the Buckeyes prematurely. I'm sure if this comes back to bite Ohio State,
we're cutting this. We're cutting this if Notre Dame wins.
But thanks for stopping by Camp Dynasty this week, and we'll see you next week.